Welcome to the penultimate leg of the journey. Panel 6, Libidinal laughter, fine art, photography, and the onto, aesthetic, logical.
Thank you, thank you. I want to say thanks to Jonathan first, because he kind of he left me at a perfect point for me to continue. He talked about Robert Frank, who was in New York in the 1950s and who also in 1962 actually exhibited at MoMA. And I'm going to do a talk. I'm an artist, and I'm going to do mainly a talk about my practice, but I will also situate it a tiny bit within art history and tie into some of my interests within that. And Robert Frank was almost there before the people I'll talk about. So it's very lovely the way Jonathan talked about Robert Frank. So basically the talk is going to talk about my latest exhibition, and I'll talk very much about how I think and how I work. But I will focus on this one exhibition. I'll start by showing you some slides of the exhibition, and then in the rest of the talk I'll go in and talk about specific works from that exhibition. So in my practice I work with considering conceptual issues and the handmade, how they can coexist to mutual benefit in a mixed media practice. My latest show is Human Silver Halo, which is at the moment on show at the Medical Museum in Copenhagen. The work was made during a 2-year association with the Museum and a photography artist residency at the Danish art workshops, also in Copenhagen. My interest in working with this particular medical museum was many. I knew that it was in the original building, and that the Danish king built for his surgeons in 1787, and that the beautiful auditorium where corpses were dissected was unaltered and still in use today, though today for more tame lectures. To me, this auditorium is a beautiful architectural manifestation of Western society's systems governing power and knowledge. It felt as if it was begging me to reshuffle it. Analog photography became my primary medium for this project, owing to its use of silver, which since Hippocrates, I'm going to pronounce that wrong, Hippocrates, the father of modern science, has been connected with healing and anti-disease properties. Though antibiotics have replaced the medical use of silver today, further research into its clinical potentials is ongoing, signaling a very human reluctance to surrender on its healing properties. I don't generally draw inspiration from history of art. My interests are instead rooted in a curiosity concerning the structures that society is built on and the values it upholds. I also have a love for science, unanswered questions, in particularly within quantum physics and neuroscience. Some writing on neuroscience has over the last few years focused on how the magician can teach the neuroscientist a thing or two about consciousness. In a Guardian article on the subject in October 2011, Mo Constandy used the painting The Conjurer by Hieronymus Bosch, which you can see here, as an illustration. As already confessed, art history is not where I draw my inspiration, but somehow The Conjurer became a talisman for this project. So when considering photography for a new project, it is the medium's methodology, social history, and art history that I weigh, and if these conceptual consideration validates its use, I go and dust off my photography gear. American artists Edward Ruja and Mel Buckner, who both worked with several mediums around the time of Robert Frank that we just saw in the previous talk, worked with several mediums, are often quoted as some of the first who in the 1960s started to use photography to serve a specific idea for an artwork. Ruchard had an ambivalent relationship to photography and always maintained he was a painter. Buckner was frustrated by the then limited literature on photography, so he began his own investigation of photography between the 1967s and 1970, which led to his piece, Misunderstandings, A Theory of Photography, which you can see here displayed in MoMA, which consists of 10 quotations about photography, where 4 unidentified were fakes. It's a piece I love, even today, when photography is embedded into our everyday, a time when photography is only part of an archival realm because of the arrival of the digital photography, with its well-known general mutability, has finally made all photography be perceived as objective. When I choose to work with black and white analog photography, I do so to tap into the authority and idealistic notion of truth this medium stood for. So to contemplate how knowledge today is built on past beliefs, structures, and habits. Ordinarily, a drawing on a photograph would refer to defacement, but when I draw on a photograph made in a place that represents the unity of a specific social knowledge, my intent is to flatten the hierarchy of knowledge. I draw simple circles that anybody can do, and they become time-consuming drawings that speak to pleasingly interrupt in a hope that the viewer contemplate it as much as the photograph behind it. I'm very aware that I'm spoiling a perfectly decent photographic image. In some ways, I am corrupting the photograph and with it also the conceptual. But instead, the motivation is to represent different volume system where none is superior. I don't aim to make a flawless, beautiful photograph as in the spirit of photographer Alfred Stieglitz, but when I use the medium to accommodate an idea or further processes, I do embrace beauty and have no need to deliberately seek what has become known as the aesthetic of early conceptual art from the 1960s. As is evident in this piece, Female Entanglement, which is a small photographic print that was dried in an embroidery ring, leaving the medical auditorium with its fathers of medical history beautifully scrunched up. These two pieces from the 1960s by artist Robert Heinecke, who worked with conceptual strategies, show that an artist who is positioned within the rough and mass-produced aesthetic of conceptual art, and frequently has been quoted as having an irreverent attitude towards a photographic image that flew in the face of everything the medium was supposed to be, unquote. Still, he also chose to work with the medium in a beautiful and playful way, almost bordering on a respect for the medium, a point rarely mentioned. The playfulness that Heinecke showed is vital to me as a practicing artist too. Sure, I photograph historical significant objects and spaces that were built by and represent male power and knowledge, so that I can interfere and add to it some of what I believe is missing. But that also extends to stretching the medium so to widen the conversation. I have a lack of contentment with the photographic, so a form for revision happened, either by drawing, cutting, shaping, or by subjecting it to conversations with other mediums, and via constellation with old artworks from my practice. This is a detail of Tidy Table Model 51. It's one of my earliest works incorporating tiny circle drawings. It was originally inspired by histology cell specimens, and it is also one of my earliest work using hexagons, which I later in 2008 used in a patchwork quilt that took the shape of two galaxies colliding as documented by NASA. But in this exhibition, I do also include traditional photographic works that tap into the history of the still life. At first glance, it may look like they are trying to impress Stieglitz with being flawless photographs of surgical instruments, but at a closer look, the photographic paper is disappointingly not flat, leaving a ghost of the handmade. This piece is called Thought Transmission, and in this piece it becomes part of the piece that the reflection of the viewer's face is visually interfering with the photograph of two trepanning instruments from different periods. An instrument used to cut through the cranium, tying back to what I talked about earlier, the conjurer, consciousness, and neuroscience. The other still life is shown here, part of the equation, has traditional wooden frames, given the common surgical tools some due respect. The glass in the frame is anti-reflective, which invites the viewer closer under the illusion that there is no glass. I've had people compliment me on not putting glass in these frames, allowing them in, and it always had to know whether I should correct them or leave the illusion in place. Earlier, I mentioned my interest in flatten the hierarchy. I can never pronounce that word, sorry. And in the two large photographic sculptural pieces, this has become literal, which you can see in the forefront here. The piece shown here is We Are the Ashes of Dying Stars, We Are Nuclear Waste. It consists of human-sized analog photographs of the dome ceiling at the medical museum. The gum tape that were used to help the photograph to dry flat is left on, leaving a rough brown edge as a witness to the physical handmade processes that made it. The print is exhibited horizontal at knee-high on a wooden floor to which it is pinned with 4 nails. On top of the photograph is lying a selection of glass objects. One of these objects is a contact lens holder scaled up to hand size and handcrafted in medical graded glass. Duchamp introduced the ready-made to the world in 1917, and since then everyday optics has been part of art. I have used the contact lens holder in previous artworks, but it took me 6 years to find a glass expert that had the expert knowledge to make this object. It is joined on the photograph by 3 groupings with glass rods and red, long-lasting synthetic elastic bands. One of these groups is still intact, and the 2 other structures are failed versions. They are inspired by polymath Buckminster Fuller's tensegrity structure, used both within architecture and engineering, and today used by some to understand biology better because it can integrate anatomy from the molecular level to the whole organism. The other photographic floor piece is we draw some arbitrary line and rule out whole areas of investigation. It is roughly the same size and height as the previous piece, but it lies on a field of metal embroidery strings. Each end of the photograph is tucked beneath a single string, leaving some movement in the photographic paper. It is a photograph of, you almost can't see it. It is a photograph of the bust of the estimate surgeon Sophus August Wilhelm Stein, who lived from 1797 to 1868, who was also a professor in anatomy at the Danish Art Academy. I celebrate the connection between art and science, so I hope he takes no offense from being lovingly moved to a more comfortable position than on a pedestal at the back of the auditorium. Printing large analog photographs means you end up with a pile of huge prints that aren't right for exhibiting on the wall or on the floor because of faults during printing. Haystacks of Healing Part 1, 2, and 3 consist of 3 books. Each is made from one large photograph that has been cut into 12 photographs that each becomes 2 pages in each book. The first book, Part 1, is a photograph of the before-mentioned surgeon. Part 2 is a photograph of a pair of surgical scissors. Part 3 is a photograph of the stairs in the curved medical auditorium. All 3 photographs are faulty in a photographic sense. They are the sacrifices that has to be allowed for the 2 acceptable photographs exhibited. We all have an embodied experience of books, how they work, feel, and look, though few people have touched a thick, matte, gelatin silver print, better known as black and white photograph. To me, these books become a form for DNA collection from the viewers. It was important to have the viewers' greasy paws embed their stories on these expensive silver-containing, time-consuming photographs bound into good old-fashioned physical books. It became about allowing access to something fragile, expensive, and unique. The covers on the books are medical barrier material that are used in surgeries, a cheap throwaway material that if it has touched our bodies, we most likely were unconscious, unless we work in the operating theatre. Conceptually, it was important that the books were covered in the material, giving us a conscious experience of a medical material normally only meant for the unconscious. In each of the 3 books, there is one drawing that is made on the back of one of the photographic pages. When I start drawing on a finished analog photograph, tension emerges. It has taken a long time to make. I don't want to ruin it. The intention is to add to the work instead of reduce it to nothing. When I draw or are in the dark room, I become conscious of my own consciousness in a way working at the computer doesn't. The finished work does not necessarily make the viewer aware of their own consciousness, but they are confronted with a subjective effort actions which does reflect on consciousness somehow. It is not a coincidence that it is a female hand that made the photos, drawings, or is represented in the films I make. I use the handmade as a description of a process of labor, manufacture, a process of knowledge, which I believe to be key when talking historically about female knowledge. It was hard to find any representation of female knowledge in the medical museum and its collections. Common Sense Has No Place at Quantum Level is a 3-minute and 54-second loop video with harp musician Trine Opsahl, shown on a hand-sized iPod with headphones. The video was shot from a fixed position towards the auditorium ceiling for 50 minutes while Trine was playing the harp for an empty auditorium. The finished video's 50 minutes is fast-forwarded to the 3-minute and 54 seconds, the duration of the soundtrack of the harp piece played. The video becomes a static photograph image with only a slight movement of shadows as an indication of time. The video lies in a display case, as you can see here, with the piece Hubble, a sterling silver cast of a plastic strainer from a jar of gherkins. It was originally exhibited in company with the before mentioned patchwork piece in 2008. When turning around from the position of the display case with the headphones on your ears, you'll be able to see the large monitor with the video. See at the back there. It's called Concealed Ovation Part 2, which is also the piece that draws you into the exhibition from the far end when you enter. The video is a close-up, fixed position recording of the silent movement of hands playing a harp in the Medical Museum's auditorium. It exists without sound to focus on the hands and the strings and to invite a conversation to emerge between the large floor-based pieces in front of it and to have a conversation with the last floor piece based in front of it that both have their strings too. So we're almost at the end. Until now, I have been focusing on finished artworks that in this project have been analog photography, which could give the false impression that I avoid the digital. Instead, I would say that my practice relies on the digital. No finished artworks exist until it's documented, it is shared, as Ben talked about yesterday. But right from the beginning, via research, and through the choices that come when working with materials and professional makers, and to help visualize the finished work, to remembering conversation and possibilities within every component that led to the finished exhibition. I'm going to leave you with some of the first digital sketches I made at Medical Museum in Copenhagen 3-4 years ago, when the first seed of an idea rooted itself in my mind. Thank you.